Go ahead, Bailey. Take us live.
Okay, all set.
Thank you, Bailey. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's salute the flag, please. Please join me. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
States of America
and to the republic
which stands
one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and
justice for all.
Pursuant to Section 5, Chapter 231 of the Public Laws of New Jersey, this is to state for the record that adequate notice of this meeting has been provided to the public by posting and maintaining the annual notice of regular meetings on the bulletin board of the municipal building, by mailing the annual notice to regular meetings for 2022 to the News Record and Star Ledger in December 2021, and by filing said notice in the office of the Township Clerk.
Ms. Adams.
Here.
Ms. Cripe.
Here.
Mr. DeLuca.
Here.
Mr. McGehee.
Here.
Mayor Daffis.
Here.
Whereas Chapter 231, Public Laws 1975, commonly known as the Open Public Meetings Act, requires that all municipal public bodies be open to the public. And whereas Section 7A provides that the governing body has discretion to prohibit or regulate the active participation of the public at any meeting, and whereas desire the governing body to comply with the provisions act same time and conduct its business in an orderly and expeditious manner, now therefore be resolved by the Township Committee, Township Maplewood does hereby prohibit, except to set forth in formal agenda, active participation in the deliberations of the governing body by the public, and except as otherwise prescribed by law, does limit the public to the observations of the actions and discussions of the governing body at all of its regular and special meetings.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Adams.
Yes.
Ms. Cripe.
Yes.
Mr. DeLuca.
Yes.
Mr. McGehee.
Yes.
Mayor Daffis.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Fritzen. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third and final budget workshop. This afternoon, we're going to go for about 2 hours, maybe a little bit less, hopefully. We will start with the last presentation by our community groups, and that would be by the Community Coalition on Race. And then we will go into discussion of our capital budget, making our final decisions of projects we want to prioritize. We'll look again at our operating expenses and see where those two things leave us in terms of a tax levy for our 2022-23 budget. We're aiming to introduce our budget on April 5th, our next public session for the TC. And hopefully today we will make some decisions that will carry us over there. Before we adjourn for today, there will be a public comment period limited to 3 minutes. But before we get to any of that, we're going to start, like I said, with the Community Coalition on Race. We're pleased to be joined by Executive Director Nancy Gagnier and Executive Board Member Kelly Quirk. Ladies, we open the Zoom to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. We have a presentation. Can we share the screen? Does that work?
Most certainly.
Great. All right, let's go for that. Here we go. All right. We are, this is our budget presentation to the Maplewood Township Committee for 2022. For those of us who don't know who we are, South Orange Maplewood Community Coalition on Race, been in existence here for 25 years. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary, which we'll talk a little bit about in a moment. But this is our mission and vision, and we have been thrilled to have the support of the Maplewood Township Committee over all this time so that we can achieve this mission and vision. And I'm going to ask Kelly to just jump in at any moment, Kelly, that you want to, since I'm controlling the slides, you can just jump in and talk if you want to add anything.
Sure.
We have Board of Trustees and our staff up here. We're fortunate to have Maplewood Township Committee person Vic DeLuca as our liaison once again. And we, as you know, we try to balance our board between both Maplewood and South Orange. And of course, based on our mission, it is intentionally integrated, racially integrated. 2022 plans for serving Maplewood. We have our main mission focus areas, community engagement, and we'll talk about these in detail, sharing what we did over 2021, so you can see where the community can see where our the funds that we received from you, how they were spent. Community engagement, marketing, residential, schools, our demographics research and reporting, and of course fundraising, so that we can continue to serve and grow our programming. So in 2021, we were, as everyone was, virtual for everything that we did. Our 20th annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. observance, we had about 2,000 views. Households were also engaged in the Luminary Project. We had forums with Maplewood resident Julie Snyder, producer of Nice White Parents. About 373 people attended that. Our coffee house on Black Health Matters. We were really trying to serve the community as we did in 2020 with accurate and up-to-date COVID-19 information. And as you well know, there was a lot of the anti-Asian hate and racism grew during that time. And we did some advocacy to address that. Kelly, you want to add anything before I go on?
Sure. And as we go on and you hear more about some of the programs we did or the front-facing programs, you know, as our community organization's job is really around true racial integration and inclusion, that happens in a number of ways. We need an environment that feels welcoming to all people, and we also need to address sort of structural problems, do research. So every little piece is a part of sort of what is in our budget, not just, you know, coffee houses here or there. But a lot of these events in particular that Nancy's pointing to tied to specific needs of the community at the time. So the Nice White Parents podcast really tied to getting parents prepared for the elementary school integration plan and thinking through what it means to be a parent in an integrated school and the roles particularly that white parents can play in not overstepping or who the school serves or understanding sort of the history of racial imbalance. Obviously, Black Health Matters was promoting vaccine competency or confidence in communities of color, specifically the Black community. And, you know, we had the benefit of working and growing over the year with some of our Asian American neighbors and sort of hearing from them and partnering with them and taking some criticism and then working and growing relationships. And that continues to this day.
Great, thanks. Whoops, I skipped way ahead. There we go. So also in 2021, our residential committee was really hard at work developing the Wealth Gap Equalizer Loan Program to support Black and non-white Hispanic homebuyers in South Orange and Maplewood. Recently, that loan program was launched with our new targeted marketing website. So if people are looking for that, they can go to choosesoma.com. They can learn about the Wealth Gap Equalizer Loan Program. We are going to do a full launch probably in the next 2 weeks as we get past our 25th anniversary event. We're really excited about being able to do this. This has been a work in progress for a few years. Once we did in 2019, after we did the demographics report and saw the drop off in the pipeline of Black in-movers and came to understand the effects of the racial wealth gap. So both of those projects, the targeted marketing website and the loan program, are serving that interest for this community and helping us to maintain our racial integration.
And I would just be remiss if I didn't point out, once this loan program launches, it will be, I believe, the first of its kind on the East Coast, and the only of its kind that's really administered by a nonprofit. or, sort of grown out of that space. And so we're very excited about the ability to do this to serve the community.
Great, thanks, Kelly. And our demographics group, the research group, is working with the 2020 census data, which most of which was only released in the fall. We do have a report on census data, on neighborhood integration at the neighborhood level, census tract level, that our trustees have reviewed, and we're building the introductory and other slides to take it out to the community. So that will happen sometime later in the spring of 2022. So I hope you'll look forward to that, and the community will look forward to seeing where we are in terms of stable racial integration. We did some Black History Month events and collaborated with Durand Hedden House on Juneteenth. Conversations on Race, we continue to partner with Seton Hall. Last year was we had speaker Jesse Hagopian on educational equity and racial justice in education. This year we're going to be looking at critical race theory. And we did a lot of work with our youth coalition youth group and had an organizing workshop with advocate Larry Ham. All of these things that we did are available, the public things that were virtual. We have videos of them. So if anybody is interested in sharing a community organizing workshop for youth with Larry Ham, that video is available on our website. And we want people to be able to take advantage of that. The same thing with a recent reparations panel we had, and the Black health advocates. All of that is available on our website. This is how we do our fundraising. Again, for the public who may not know, we get municipal support from both Maplewood and South Orange. In 2021, we had grants from Orange Orphan Society, from Collegiate Church in Manhattan, from Board Appeal, from Essex County Local Arts Program to support arts programs. We raise money through our Luminary Project, through appeals, and through our Celebrating Integration event each year. So coming up in 2022, we've already held our annual MLK event. Again, that is also available on our website. The video from that, it was as moving as ever, as we had hoped to be in person, but we're once again virtual. We engaged nearly as many households once again in the luminary lighting. We've got coming up on March 29th, the 25th anniversary event highlighting the work of the coalition since 1996. We're officially incorporated in 1997 this month. We're really excited to have Nancy Solomon moderating our panel. We have a video. We have our wonderful program director, Audrey Rowe, and her daughter, also known as SZA, making a special appearance. We're getting a lot of good press on this event. We have hundreds of people already signed up, and we're really hoping to use this to spread the word and engage other communities in the work that we do, and really expand our model to other communities. And that has been a part of our mission from the beginning. There will be an upcoming workshop on talking to children about race. We already held our reparations discussion, and we're continuing that work on reparations, trying to get the Assembly and the Senate in New Jersey to establish a task force that to consider what reparations looks like in New Jersey. We do have Juneteenth coming up once again at Durand Hedden. I already mentioned conversations on race. We are working with our Interfaith Outreach Committee on community dialogues about the relationship between religion, race, and privilege. And we have a big project, Integration Through the Arts project this year. Like I mentioned before, we got a grant from Essex County Local Arts Program. They actually gave us more money than we asked for, which we're really excited about. And that allows us to engage and pay more local artists to lead these integrated art circles. And we're really looking forward to that. And Kelly, let me know if you want to say anything more about these projects.
Not necessarily these projects, but we do, and it may be on the next slide, but Nancy mentioned earlier, we're really looking forward to being able to share with the community the updated demographics report. It will look slightly different than it had in the past. Mr. DeLuca got a preview of this in one of our board meetings, as the whole board sort of got a preview and to ask questions and to sort of filter through. And our demographics, our committee that sort of works on the demographics report is also looking on putting together some other mini reports in addition to sort of one that's about residential integration. So we're looking forward to seeing those things come through. And we also, last year, part of our integration through the arts project, speaking of things that kind of launched this year, but were done last year, because there's some work that happened last year. We did have some youth documentarians who made 4 documentaries regarding artists in our community. I believe Frank's daughter might be in one of them, I saw. And I think it's a great opportunity not just to see these documentaries of amazing artists from Maplewood and South Orange, but to see the work that the youth put in to making these documentaries, to learning the skill set to make these things happen, and sort of, and learning about editing and thinking through that process from start to build end. And we were very happy to sort of see those launched this year.
Thanks, Kelly. I almost forgot about the youth documentaries. They're definitely worth watching. They're all up on our website, communitycoalitiononrace.org. The rest of this is I think almost the final slide. This is the advocacy, anti-racism, and racial justice work that we do. I've already talked about the wealth gap equalizer loan. Part of that process includes housing counseling workshops, and we've done those in the past, and we'll continue to do those demographics reports, as Kelly just talked about. We've got coming up next week, I keep calling it coffee and conversation. We're not actually having coffee because it will be virtual, so people can bring their own coffee to their home desk, but we are meeting with over 50 realtors at this point and the superintendent to talk about what the integration plan looks like and how realtors can best serve their clients and understand how families are assigned to schools now and moving forward, which is a really important part of the work that realtors do. Our affirmative marketing, we continue to increase awareness and interest among prospective Black home buyers and renters. We're working on regional collaborations on racial integration and equity issues. We host our BOE Candidates Night, and we continue with our unconscious bias and anti-racism trainings, both internal to the community and with groups outside the community. And we have a few scheduled already. And this is a very general look at our budget, but in 2022, we anticipate fundraising at $93,000, grants at about $13,500. We're asking the townships for the same amounts that we've received over the last probably 8 years or so. Our expenses in programming are just under 150, operating about 50, fundraising, as you can see, 16.5. And we have been able to build up some surplus, and we're expending that on the mission, on programming areas. Some of this is connected to the launch of the targeted marketing website and the loan. So we know that we are over budget, but we are making good and appropriate uses of those surplus funds in this year to push those programs out. So that's why you see loan fund allocation at the bottom and grant surplus. Some of our grants, of course, a carryover from the previous calendar year. Our fiscal year is the calendar year, but our grants sometimes are not expended in our fiscal year, so they're carryovers. And we want to thank you for your support, your presence, our liaison, all the things that you have worked on us with over the last year and many years before Black History Month. The Community Board on Police, we consider such an important outgrowth of some of the work that we did that is a positive thing that Maplewood is now engaged in, and for use of community venues like the Woodland and the Bergdorf. And we deeply appreciate all of that. And this is us, and I will stop sharing unless there's something that anybody wants me to go back to, but you can tell me to stop sharing at any moment. So you can see more people on the screen.
I think we're good. And if we have any questions about the presentation, we'll ask you to share any particular slide as necessary. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you both again. I'm going to cue Deputy Mayor DeLuca, your liaison currently, to see if he has any remarks or questions.
I don't.
Okay. Are there any questions or remarks from my colleagues, the rest of my colleagues?
No questions for me, Mayor.
Okay.
Great
Well,
job as always, you guys.
yeah. I mean, that's what I wanted to say. I'm really very excited about the wealth gap equalizer loan. This has been something in the works for at least a couple of years, and there were different versions of it. And, I'm really, really thrilled to see that, to see it coming together and helping the first couple of families buy their first home in Soma or Mapso. And that's really exciting. And we look forward to working with you in the coming months for our Juneteenth celebration. As you may have heard, we are hosting in Maplewood this year. Of course, it's a joint celebration with South Orange, but we will be hosting. And we'll put a little committee together and reach out to you shortly and start planning all of that fun stuff. So with that, we want to thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the time. And I also just want to remind you that we do submit each year at the end of the year a scope of work agreement. So if anybody's looking for more, if any trustees are looking for more detailed information on that was on the slides, it's in that request for support. And thank you again.
You're welcome. And we look forward to the anniversary celebration next week. President Cullum and I just videotaped our remarks yesterday, and I ended mine with encouraging people to become monthly donors at $25. That's the least you can do for the 25th anniversary. So good luck with that. We look forward to the celebration.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, back to us, the group here. We move forward to our capital budget, and I'm going to turn it over to Township Administrator Jimes to get us started, to set us up here. Mr. Jimes, I know you forwarded some updated materials earlier in the week, and again, updated materials yesterday with your recommendations with respect to the capital budget. And those recommendations came together after meeting with myself and Mr. McGeehee and our CFO, Mr. Koloje, the Finance Committee, in other words, a few times this week, and going back and forth and making adjustments. I understand that Mr. Koloje has made more adjustments late last night, and we'll be talking about those and seeing how they affect what information we were given yesterday with respect to your recommendations. So, Mr. Jimes, you're muted.
Thank you, Mayor. By way of background, just for the sake of the public record, since we met the last time, I met with some of the key stakeholders here in the township as it relates to department heads and the CFO, and as you mentioned, the Finance Committee, to try to prioritize at the request of the governing body the capital budget request, which initially came in at approximately $13.3 million. After analyzing that with the Director of Public Works and Engineering, along with the Superintendent, we divided that up into approximately $9.66 million in high priority items and $3.66 million in low to medium priority items. After a series of discussions that involve what projects we need to do now, what projects or what items we need to order, what projects we can defer till either later this calendar year or early next year, we got a total bondable amount to be recommended to just under $8.2 million. I'm sorry, a total capital amount of just under $8.2 million. We looked at some old ordinances to see where we could repurpose any of the funds, and we found approximately $560,000 in two old ordinances, one related to the Woodland HVAC system and the other related to the sewer camera in system. On that one, the Director of Engineering suggested and agreed that we could do half of that project now and repurpose a portion of that project for this year's capital and then rebudget in a subsequent calendar year for the rest of that. So that gave us $560,000, which then netted a total bondable amount for the high priority items to just about $7.627 million to be bonded. The net effect of that would be around $7.4 million because we're getting reimbursements in the tune of $745,000 from the NJDOT and the ADA. But as you know, we have to bond the entire amount for that upfront before we get the reimbursements. We also looked at, with the help of the Finance Committee and the Chief Financial Officer, the operating expenses, and we focused on two key areas since our meetings. One was the health insurance line item. The CFO and his office have been undertaking an audit of our health insurance plans that each individual employee has. And based on turnover, retirements, people departing the township, change in plans, we saw that we were over budgeting there. And I recommended in the email, as you saw yesterday, a reduction in that amount of $150,000. And we also talked about, which I said could actually be more, and I think it's possible when the CFO speaks, maybe that increases, that $150,000 reduction increases to a higher amount, but I was trying to be conservative in my initial email to you yesterday. We also took a look at the fund balance as a way to close what is referred to as a gap, a $285,000 gap, something I should have mentioned before the health insurance. But as you know, unlike the federal and state government, we can't just borrow to fill that gap. We actually have to make reductions in our budgets. So that's where we found the health insurance money. And then we took a look at and discussed the fund balance. The fund balance, often referred to as surplus. We thought we could maybe increase that responsibly to an amount that would allow us to close that gap a little bit. And it's important to know that, when you're using fund balance and you're proposing to use excess, what is called surplus, depending on the situation, some people could call that a stopgap or a gimmick or something that's only going to cause problems in the future. But as it relates to Maplewood Township, that's just not the case, because we, knowing where we are revenue-wise in Q1 of this year, we're at pre-pandemic levels there, and we're budgeting, on the lower end just based on the averages that we had to do over the last couple of years. Also, we know we have debt retiring, which will save us to the tune of $1.5 to $2 million in the next budget year. And then we also have revenue in the area of cannabis that we know is coming that we're not anticipating because it's too soon to anticipate that. So we have areas, and they're just three, but we have areas where we know the township is going to be in a different financial position. So we're not proposing just increasing surplus and then a year from now thinking, all right, well, how are we going to make up the fact that we lost some surplus? That's not the case. This is a responsible proposal of increase in that fund balance usage. So conservatively, I estimated using maybe $135,000. And then also we talked about personnel. It's my recommendation, as I mentioned in the email, without getting into too much detail today or at this moment, to give an across the board increase to our non-aligned staff, as opposed to the merit increases that are traditionally requested and analyzed. And again, that's just the root of that recommendation is based on the fact that, as been said numerous times, we are in a tough budget, cycle this year. But we know, as the CFO has said several times, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So in that email, I closed it out by saying that if you had agreed with the capital recommendations the O&E recommendations and the personnel recommendations, we would be able to introduce a budget at about 2.9% increase in the amount to be raised by taxes over last year, which, by any measure would be a responsible increase in budget. However, after I sent that email to you yesterday, late last night, I received an email from the finance office that I actually saw this morning for the first time that changed a significant amount of those numbers. So I'm going to let the CFO discuss that.
Mr. Kaloja?
Gotta find my mute button. My apologies. So we have been continuing to vet the budget and look at the numbers. Some of the changes that we made based on the finance committee's meetings that they had, and the administrator's recommendation, which the finance committee is concurring with. We added an additional $30,000 to cover Juneteenth and the 4th of July celebration. We also made adjustments to the salary and wages based on the recommendation of the administrator. I'm assuming you guys will discuss that further in closed session. And we also made an adjustment to the capital improvement fund, which is where we pull our 5% down payment in order to adopt the bond ordinance. It should be noted that the original numbers and the raw data that was provided to you was based on roughly a little over $13 million worth of projects, and that was $670,000 worth of down payment that we were required to put in place. Because our capital improvement fund last year was $470,000, that represented $200,000 that was outside the budget cap. And that's going to be our real challenge this year is the fact that we have no tax levy bank available to us. We used it all up last year in order to address our pandemic issues that we had. And so this is the year that we're going to have no choice but to stick to the 2% levy cap. So by reducing the capital projects and the capital improvement fund, or the 5% down payment in return to that, we brought that figure to underneath $470,000. So from a tax perspective, we saw a $200,000 reduction in the tax levy. The tax levy is still pinned at the maximum 2%, and we are currently dealing with a budget gap in order to have a balanced budget of roughly $400,000 that we're going to need to figure out where we're going to be able to accomplish sending this down to the state. We have maximized all of our revenues, other than the taxes. All of our alternate revenues have been maximized. There's a few of them that outperformed what we did with a 3-year average last year, and so we went with the actual numbers that we collected last year. There are several that significantly underperformed from the 3-year average. Those items are going to, again, be 3-year averaged. So even though this is the year that we can self-examine our budget and don't need to send it down to the state, the recommendation is to take advantage of Chapter 74, utilize the 3-year average on those revenues that are problematic from last year, and that is going to trigger the state having to approve our budget before we can adopt. So once we introduce, we'll send it down there, and then just like last year, the state will spend the next 2 or 3 weeks grilling us to defend our position on a lot of the items that we have in our budget. And if we're successful like we were last year, then we'll be able to move forward with the public hearing and adopt the budget in May.
So, Mr. Kaloje, is what you're saying then that we're looking at a gap not of 285, but rather 400. So there's another roughly, what is that, 115 that we have to make up. Is that right?
Yes, I think the majority of that feeder came from, we settled with the dispatchers union. The budget had calculated that they were going to get 2% like most of the other unions were getting, and instead they got 2.5%. So we needed to calculate out new salaries going all the way back from 2020, and then we needed to calculate retro pay from 2020 and retro pay from 2021. And that additional expense pushed us up from the 285 that our administrator was talking about when it was a sunny Friday afternoon, to the more gray clouds of a Friday night, and folding that in. And additionally, the proposed plan for how to address the personnel matters also upticked some of that funding as well.
Okay, so let's go back first before we keep going in the weeds with OE and how we're going to close this gap. Let's talk about capital projects. Mr. Jimes, can you share your screen with the capital project recommendations that you were able to get down to 7.62?
So this is a summary of that sheet of what I sent out late yesterday. It starts with engineering, goes into some environmental stuff, and your subtotal is down here. 7.6 or 8.1 is the total, 7.6 to be bonded with the reclassification that I referenced, for a net amount of 7.4. So we would be bonding 7.627578, and we would be introducing, I think you have to do it in separate ordinances since they were separate bonds, 2 separate ordinances reclassifying these bonds.
Great. And as you stated in your introduction, you have confirmed these projects with all of the relevant departments, the department heads, right? As to whether, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I did, and Director Kittner and I sat down individually, and then Director Kittner and the CFO and myself also discussed it, and we talked about how we would, do some of the projects at a future date. So, and still not delay, but it's important to know, as you mentioned, Mayor, yesterday in our meeting, that this is still a commitment to the infrastructure in the community, and it's significant, a decent amount more projects than we've done in the past. So.
It certainly is, definitely. Okay, so let's open the floor to my colleagues for questions about the capital budget, the capital project recommendations. Are there any questions or remarks? Anyone? I think Mr. DeLuca and Ms. Adams.
Easier to see the sheet.
Ms. Adams can go.
Okay.
I was just going to say you could go because I was still scrolling on the sheet.
Can you stop sharing this, Mr. Jimes? Okay. I wanted to look at, but thank you for sending out the whole list, because I wanted to see the ones we cut out. So one of the concerns I have is that we are not dealing with some of the drainage issues that have been brought to our attention, particularly Kendall, Bowden. And I don't see any money in here unless it's in the road program for drainage. It looks like the road program has a pretty healthy list of roads, and I just don't see any room in there to cover some drainage, whether it be planned improvements or emergency improvements. So that's one issue. The other is, I guess, the whole thing on DeHart. This. Do we really need 250 for the plan? Because the majority of the work is going to be done in 2023 and 2024. And can that be brought back down some to pick up some dollars here and there? So those would be the two things that I would say. There's just one other little thing here, and that is 2216, this the DeHart parking lot. There may be an opportunity to seek for some funding from neighborhood preservation program. So we talked about this at engineering. So I think there's some flexibility there. I'm not sure we're going to know by, well, I know we're not going to know by April 5th, but that's something, and I think we could talk about it more. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it now because I don't want to jeopardize any potential grant seeking. But those would be the things. I'm concerned about the drainage. I think the money for DeHart might be a little hefty just for the planning and testing. So that's it.
Yeah, my issues had to do with the drainage because we've been, and maybe it's in that one line that says the swale.
No, that's for just the swale up on those roads up there that got destroyed in Ida.
Right. And is any of that money coming from FEMA that we can hope for, or insurance? Not insurance, obviously, but FEMA?
The swale money may come a portion from insurance. We've submitted to insurance an identified amount that would just be based off the damaged swales. We went over the ordinance with them, what it entails, the ownership issues and the title issues and the responsibility issues. And after going through all of those, with our risk manager and one of the members of the third-party administrator, they suggested we submit it. It won't be a significant amount of that because we're only identified the swale areas that got damaged, not exactly the roads, the entire road. But there is some.
What about the responsibility of the residents by those swales? We talked about, since all of us residents are responsible for sidewalk and curbs. We talked about possibly a special assessment.
I think just from the engine, we've talked about that's a possibility, but we haven't moved it along far enough that we could build it into a budget. And just on the answer of FEMA, I don't think we're going to see FEMA money until 2023 at best.
Yeah. I also had a question about the traffic calming at various locations line. What is that 250 based on?
Let me just pull it up. I have all the sheets in front of me. 2208.
So why Jerry looks at that information, let's talk about some of these issues, right? So Vic, you mentioned 180 in regards to the Hart. No, you had the 180 here for the Hart project, and then the 250 for the Hart Field. The NPP, that's what 125 a year, right? For 5 years.
This is NPP has a capital program, which is different than the 125.
Okay, how much is that capital program?
It's
almost $4 million across the state, so it's competitive.
Okay. How much do you think we would get out of that, out of curiosity? Like, how much of that 180 you think we could get subsidized by it? Just guessing.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I mean, this is all very new to us. I'm going on a webinar Tuesday. I'll have more information. Okay.
Because either way, if you get a lot of money for the town, which would be great, we could still leave that 180 in there. Then just like, as Jerry identified, $560,000 that we basically bonded for that we haven't used repurposing, we can still repurpose that 180, right? So we could take that 180 and repurpose it, maybe for the milling or for something else as well. And then on the 250 for DeHart Field, we could definitely look at that one, and maybe we can cut that down 40% and bring that to 150. So that could be anywhere from basically 280 up to 280 that we could repurpose, but still leaving the number as is.
What is the 250 based on for DeHart Park?
We'd have to look at the.
For the Hart, he was referencing soil testing, development of plans to address the drainage and the soil deficiencies, and construction improvements. And it was the investigation and design.
Right, but
that was his estimates based on what that would cost. The director's estimates based on what all that would cost.
But the construction, as Mr. DeLuca noted earlier, is not likely to happen this year, right?
No, and that's why we did take out the construction aspect of it as for pushing that off till next year. So that would have been 750.
Come again?
The estimate for the construction the director had was 750. So we took that out and separated it from evaluation to 250 and reconstruction for 750. And the 750 is for the future.
Yeah, that's right. When you look at the original thing, it was $1 million. And so I think that was the right to take that 75% and to defer it. And the question on the table is there more that can be deferred? And if we defer more of that 25% that's currently allocated in the budget, that's fine. But we shouldn't minimize that number. We should take that number and pivot it over to the other areas, which were 329, the milling, and the 493, which has been communicated. So we're not going to be reducing the capital. We're just going to move it from one line to another.
Correct.
Yeah, that's if we're doing one whole capital ordinance and we identify the entire ordinance as drainage, engineering, things like that, we just have bond counsel write that in a way that makes it more flexible.
100%.
Right. Mr. Jones, what about?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I mean, if we have the 250 in DeHart, we can't use that for drainage.
No, but if you write the ordinance in a way where you without specifying the specific location of a project, and you say drainage, and you say field evaluation, soil testing, you can do things.
Okay.
I've worked with bond councils to have flexibility, and
I'm not suggesting we lower the bond. No, I'm actually would argue we might want to increase it a little bit because it's just that, we all know that we're getting people coming to us about specific problems with their roads and drainage. We just talked the last meeting, and I mentioned at our township committee, we're bringing this whole thing about sub pumps. That may require some additional drainage and things. So I'm thinking, maybe we want to put even a little bit more into the capital. Right.
And I'm agreeing with you, Vic. I think that if there's a way we can take, some of these line items that we learned from Jerry's work with the department heads, we found over $500,000 that we bonded for that we haven't leveraged yet. We can write these bonds for more macro into, we can have at least the baseline we have here allocated to these projects that we're hearing about engineering, and maybe even more if necessary. I concur with that.
Yeah, we can take something, one of the items, if you're thinking, I don't know, $200,000, and one of the items in red that we canceled out, we can just, reword that. Instead of saying identifying roads, we could just say drainage and road repair, drainage issues. So yeah, that's easy to do. I don't know if 200,000 is enough that you're thinking of, but that's a simple fix. And that adds 5% of that to the operating budget. So.
Right. And in terms of drainage improvements, I did note there that included in your recommendations are the drainage improvements over on Maple Terrace. Residents have complained, and we all know what happened there. Right? That's included, I think. Yep. Okay. Other issues with capital projects?
I still didn't get an answer on the traffic calming.
Oh,
No.
right.
I have that. So it's 2208. He's associating that with professional service fees, consultation, and he's considering the items on Jefferson and Maplewood, Walton Road and Jefferson, and others. So it was a general amount. It wasn't based on anything overly specific.
Was the question to reduce that number or just to understand why the number was so high, just for point of clarification?
To understand, I think.
Okay.
To understand and possibly reduce it. We're looking for reductions. That's a big number for traffic calming. I mean, we can't speed hump the whole town. It's getting absurd. We got to start having enforcement be prioritized a little more.
So what I would do is I would be on the page of saying if that could be looked at and we could potentially reduce that allocation, but to Vic's point, take that money and fund it in the other place to address those other swelling issues. So I wouldn't reduce the capital, but I would reallocate that whole number to what Vic said. That's my position.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. Go ahead, Vic. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think, remember that the $250,000 in capital represents $12,500 in our operating budget. So it's not a 1-for-1. Anytime, everything we cut in capital is only 5 cents on a dollar.
I know. I
Okay,
understand.
so I think we could resolve this by, the road program we've used to deal with both drainage issues and also, pedestrian safety and all that. So we can just put this money in there and be able to just do more roads. We don't necessarily have to say that it's used for traffic calming.
I'd also ask the engineer to look for, I worry sometimes about the road list. I understand how he prioritizes them, or his department does. But sometimes there's roads that are much less traveled that are included when there are other roads that are more traveled and in worse shape. So I'd like him to reevaluate that on his list with his department, just because that list is, there's some streets in town that are worse, not the least of which is one that we've heard about on Bowdoin, which has those major drainage issues. And I think there needs to be some consideration for that, as opposed to, a smaller street that almost nobody goes on.
Okay. I'll discuss that with him and come up with a plan.
Great. So Jerry, you have your marching orders on the capital side.
Yep.
Joe, you're looped into all of this?
Yes, because it adjusts the amount of the capital improvement fund that we would need to put into the operating budget.
Exactly.
Are
Okay.
the doors on the wood?
Any other?
Oh, wait, sorry. Oh, I thought I muted myself and went to another screen, but I didn't. Never mind. Are the doors on the Woodland on here? Or are they already funded? I feel like we had some funding for that, but he's talking about doing that. And I don't see it.
I believe it was in last year's bond ordinance. I'm taking a look right now to see if I can find it.
I thought it was funded, but I don't see it here, so it's probably last year.
Because I think last year's discussion was trying to pare it back by half, and then after discussion amongst the TC, it was silly to do half the doors now and half the doors the following year, and the money was put back in for all the doors.
We are looking at that again a little bit. I asked that we look at, and we're going to meet over there to look at, because there's beautiful windows above all those doors. And so there's a potential we're going to look at what's behind the siding on that portion of the building and maybe be able to do it right. Because when I was looking at the plans for those doors, along with HPC, there's all these flashing and all this stuff that's required because of the aluminum siding, which was put on in 1978 or something. And it's all dented and stuff. So there's a potential for restoring the siding and making the door replacement more logical and less dealing with all the stuff that shouldn't even be there in the first place, plus opening up the windows above, which would require less siding and less replacement. So anyway, just so you know, we're looking at that and hoping it brings the number down for the replacement of the doors.
The TC did approve last year, and we adopted a bond ordinance for $100,000 for the doors. We haven't spent any of it yet.
Yeah, I don't think that's enough. And I would suggest you go back to Mr. Kittner. It really is a major issue. The doors are actually falling apart. And, there's a whole safety issue because we have to have functioning doors for exit there. And so I would suggest you go back, and this may be an area we have to put a little bit more money in.
Hopefully we'll do a better job with it, because we could just restore the original shingles just on that section and do a better job on those doors because they'll fit right. And I think part of the reason they've decayed is because of water from the siding, you know, getting underneath. So anyway, we're trying to do it better. I'm hopefully we'll save a little, but who knows?
Okay, anything else on capital side? Okay, we're gonna move on then to the other side of the equation. Mr. Kolodziej?
What
So
other side, what other side of the
Go ahead,
equation?
Mr.
regarding the operating budget, the mayor mentioned $115,000 based, what we're missing from the 285 based off the recommendations that we, if the committee were to agree, that leaves us with $115,000 to, I guess, find, for lack of a better word. When I recommended the 150 for reduction in the health insurance line item, that was, significantly lower than what you said you can cut, but you were still looking at it. So I wanted to know if you had the opportunity to think if that could actually be cut even more than the 150 that I conservatively estimated.
We are only halfway through the audit on the health benefits package, and that's where we were saying that at this point in time, we're at 150. So it would stand to reason as we finish out the rest of the population that number will increase. How much it'll increase, I don't know.
Okay.
What's the timeline on that, Mr. Kolodziej, about when we're gonna know?
It's on my to-do list for Monday morning, Mayor.
So let's say, just throwing this out there, if we're 115 short, just conservatively estimate half of that, another $57,500, to be reduced, which I still think is a conservative number. And then took the other half and instead of the 135 use of fund balance to the 135 plus 57.5. So just basically splitting that in half between those two line items, a decrease in one place and an increase in another. Would that work?
That would get us to the total number, yes.
Okay. So, ideally, I would like it to be mostly the health insurance if possible, but for the reasons I stated before, I have no concerns whatsoever about increasing the use of fund balance for this year.
Is everyone else comfortable with that, Mr. DeLuca?
Does the current operating budget include the new employees that were requested?
Yes.
Most of them.
Not all of them, though.
I think before we haven't seen that list of the recommendations.
Personnel, yeah.
And I'm not sure, it was probably about 5 people that were requested new or more.
There were 3 in the DPW. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, I believe 4 in community services.
And those DPW ones are really an offset because we would be replacing the outside contract.
Right.
So new custodians would be replacing the outside contracts. That kind of is actually not, it's a savings, actually.
And there's one in the clerk's office too.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to have a conversation whether we're comfortable adding more staff. And then I know Mr. Jimes recommending to deal with the adjustments that people, some of the department heads ask for adjustments for their folks. Some of them ask for merit. I would like to know, and if we don't know now, that's fine, what number that represents, those requests. And how does that compare to the proposal you have on the table, Mr. Jimes? And then also, how does the proposal you have on the table impact the normal annual increase we give to non-bargaining unit employees? Is this in addition to? Is it separate from? So if it isn't in addition to, then it's really not addressing the requests because they would get that anyway.
Yeah, we were, the number that I was recommending for the non-aligned members was 4% across the board, not in addition to, normally it's 2%, 2.5%, whatever you're giving. We're recommending 4% for those non-aligned members. For the contractual members, I'm recommending they're in the CBA. The CBA dictates their salaries, and that's the way it should continue to dictate it. So I'm differentiating those. The total requests, I do have that number that were all requested, would be $570,000 if it were granted as initially requested. And $570,136. And Joe, maybe you can talk about the difference between the 4% across the board for non-union versus how that 570 and how that impact saved some money.
Sure. So initially, there was a bunch of requests that I believe the TC was CC'd on. The proposal was to eliminate these requests and go 4% across the board. The math error that we discovered from last night when we were doing the calculations is that there are, I don't know, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. It's about 16 exempted employees that are on this list for either adjustments or merit increases. So when we went 4% across the board, that wound up getting applied to 80 people as opposed to 16 people who were making requests. And so that altered the number slightly. I think what's kind of important to understand is that while we're staring at a $400,000 gap, prior to Mr. Johns' recommendation, we were staring at a $915,000 gap. So there was a significant impact on this proposal in terms of bringing us down. It just didn't bring us down as far as we thought it was going to.
Right, but I don't think that answers the question yet. I mean, so we were at, the request came in at 570 plus a little bit, 570, 100, you said, or 200,000,
570, 136.
Okay, so where does that take us from there with the recommendation?
That's a little difficult to track because the way it gets plugged into the budget, there are non-affiliated personnel across all of our departments. So this particular document is not tracking all 80 people. It was just adjusting the salary and wages in each individual department's line item to cover the 4%. So some line items went down, some line items actually went up because they had more exempted employees, but none of them were asking for any kind of adjustment or merit increase. So as an example, the finance department saw a significant drop in what was initially presented in raw data to what is now currently creating a $400,000 gap because we just went 4% across the board for my entire department is exempted. So now where the finance department made a request for 3 employees, we now put 4% across the board for 6 employees, and I've got 1 vacancy at this point in time. And so that certainly was lower than what was requested in terms of the adjustments. But then we run into the same issue when we get into community development. We run into the same issue when we get into community services. We ran into the same issue in the DPW as well. And so that, from an individual perspective, where it landed from 570 to 136, I would need to figure out a way to do the math on that because, like I said, all we did was go through the budget line by line and add in, take out what was the initial request and then add back in the 4% increase. So I wasn't really tracking it as much as I was trying to get it inputted into the budget so that we can have something to discuss.
And that 570, I should clarify, did include some of the bargaining unit requests, which we would only handle within the confines of the CBA. So I can pull out 570 less those and give you a better number.
So I think what we're going to need, like you did for capital, we're going to need to look at this. I'd like to see all the personnel requests in a chart. I think that was forwarded earlier on, weeks ago, before our first budget workshop. And then a separate chart or separate tab showing where we're going from there, from the original requests.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then maybe using color coding as you've been doing to separate the people who are exempt from the other folks.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can kind of come up with a easier version of the chart. So without showing names, you know, we do have a chart that's kind of like this already. So it'll be just easy to modify.
Right. So go ahead.
Totals. We
I'm
also
sorry.
need totals along with that sheet, that chart, because the last, I'm looking at the chart from before with and there's no totals on it.
Right.
And then, so, yeah, we need apples and apples kinds of things.
Okay, so I'm going to open the floor so I'm not hogging all the time here, but I apologize for going here. I don't want to do this. I'm going to get a little prickly. I just don't know, you know, we want to introduce this budget on April 5th. And that's around the corner, and there seems to be a lot more homework to be done. This is not directed at anyone in particular, but I'm a little frustrated. We know that we had this budget workshop planned. In fact, because of my schedule and all of you being accommodating and flexible, thank you again, we pushed it back to today. And that was like 3 weeks ago. So I'm a little bit frustrated. The calculations are still being done and we don't have the numbers. And I also appreciate the efforts, don't get me wrong, but I don't know. I feel a little frustrated right now and I'm just sharing it. So what are the next steps here?
So can I ask?
Go ahead.
I share some of that frustration because I'm not sure I have a good handle yet to be able to make a decision. I would like to see on, and I'm sorry, how many, we're talking about 6 or 7 new employees that were being requested? 8.
8. Okay.
8. No, not 80, 8.
8.
Okay. 8. Okay. I would like to see a rationale from the administrator as to why you agree that these should be on. We've already seen the rationale from the department heads. But why do you agree with them? Because, you know, we're talking about trying to keep the taxes down. And I think a lot of people are going to ask us why we're adding 8 more people to the town employee list. So that's number 1 on the new employees. I need to be convinced that all these employees are necessary. On the, you know, I think we have to be careful because we talk about these as merit. Some of these requests that were made for existing employees, it wasn't about merit, it was about fairness, it was about adjustments. And if there's an inequity in the system now that someone is doing more work than they're getting paid for relative to other people or other municipalities or something like that, because maybe their title is not good or something. I don't know why. By doing a blanket increase to everybody, we perpetuate that inequity. We don't address somebody who may be working more jobs than there actually is in their title. So again, I would like to see from the administrator an analysis. And I know you can do this, Mr. Giants, because when we interviewed you, you know, your strong thing to me was your budgeting savviness. And I know you can do this because we talked about this. I would like you to go through this, and I want you to use your professional expertise to tell us whether you think a request for someone is merited or not. Not merit because they do a good job, but that because they're, you know, the rationale is sound. And quite honestly, I'm not sure if someone is working, doing a good job, and is working within their title, I'm not sure why they should get a 4% raise, and the person who's a bargaining unit who works across the table from them is only going to get 2.5%. I mean, we've always tried to make those sort of blanket increases similar to the bargaining unit so that we don't have our CWA and other people making 2.5. And because you're not in the union, you're making 4%. I think that creates some problems. So I'm a little bit I'm not sold yet on your proposal of what you put on the table. So,
Can I follow up on that? I'm sorry, Nancy, and then you can go next. I agree in part, as we would say in the law business, and disagree in part. So I agree with the first part of that, that we need to look at the requests and tease out merit from necessary adjustments that need to be made for purposes of equity. Because there are, and I can think of 2 employees off the top of my head that have historically been shortchanged, and we need to bring them to a better place. And these are dynamic and awesome employees, and we care about them. So I agree with that, but I don't necessarily agree with this part that, if someone is a part of a bargaining unit, they have more power as an employee, they have more protection. And I don't think it's necessarily inequitable to say that someone outside of a bargaining unit may have a bigger increase, because that's all they have, right? So, I'm not really sold on that either. I don't think the recommendation is way off, but I think in light of all the things that we've just pointed out, Mr. Gimes, I think we do need to have an analysis where you can sort of walk us through all of this and paint the picture. Ms. Adams?
I think that analysis needs to be a little more clear. We always get comps, if you will, to the same position in other municipalities. But what's lacking?
Oh, Ms. Adams, I think you froze. Is it just me?
No, I think she froze up.
Okay. Verizon 5G.
While she comes back, I'll stop talking when she comes back. But while she comes back, I just concur. The reason for my 4% analysis was largely because of what the mayor said. I do look at them as it's a philosophical discussion to be had, obviously, but I look at those bargaining and non-bargaining people differently for those reasons, and the statutory and legal protections of joining a union versus not. Whereas and none of this involves me, by the way, because I'm not included in this 4%, but people like me and department heads who don't have statutory protections can be, for all practical purposes, terminated at a moment's notice, then have to hire their own attorneys if they feel like they're wronged. So there's a series of protections that, those non-aligned members of the staff will never have that a union has. And that's the benefit that they have of joining that bargaining agreement. But anyway, I see Ms. Adams is back. So
Yeah,
Welcome back, Ms.
how
Adams.
much did you hear me say? Because all of a sudden I noticed Vic was frozen, and then all of a sudden everybody was frozen. You
We
hear
didn't hear
nothing?
anything. Nope, so start from the beginning.
I was so prolific. So I was saying that the analysis of somebody's request to bring them in line with the same position in other towns is often faulted because they don't take into consideration how long somebody in another town has been in that position. Did everybody hear me?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want a comparison with the assistant person in this department who's been there 5 years, comparing themselves to somebody who's been in their job for 25 years. And that happens every year when we get these comparatives. So I'd like that to be part of your analysis that we're requesting.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Or doing comps to municipalities that have 3 times our budget, right? Like
It needs to be, if it's a comp, it needs to be a comp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Any other concerns, issues?
I can go through what I think are the bullet points of to-do list to have to you in the next couple of days. Let me know if you think I missed anything. Just take a relook at the capital ordinance and reword that to address drainage issues. Ask the director to take a review of the road list and specifically mentioning Bowden. Just double check the Woodland door issue. I know there's 100,000 you said reference. I'm not sure if that's enough or not, but we'll have to get someone looking at that. And then as it relates to the salaries, I'll just Excel spreadsheet these, color code them, and provide the analysis based on the information that the department had submitted, and give you the cost analysis of what I proposed versus what was requested and what would be proposed if we were to address any of these potential increases.
Right. And I think the other item that I have in my notes is just getting a little more understanding of the traffic calming request of 250.
And then I'll just add, one more to that, because how this is resolved either way, I think the operating and the CFO will finish his audit on the health insurance, and between that may be enough to just close whatever we're dealing with here, as far as the 115 or maybe 125 if we add another 100,000 into, or 200,000, 150,000 into the capital. So that might go up to 125, 130, depending if we added. So we'll finish that audit on the health.
Mr. Gimes, the other street, when we were talking about the capital, was Kendall. Bowden and Kendall. Kendall dropped off the list.
Yeah, I have that.
Hey, can I ask a question? What happens if we don't introduce on April 5th? Because there's a lot of information
Correct.
and more time to talk about this.
Correct. I was about to say this is not going to happen for 4 or 5. I was going to speak next, but I think what we need to do, Mayor, is have another meeting, another budget meeting. I mean, last years past, we've had 3, 4, 5 budget meetings on Saturday. We just have to spend more time doing it. This is our job. So we need to find another Saturday to do this. The finance committee needs to meet as well. When we go into close on April 5th, we can talk about personnel, but we need more information heading into that. So that's personnel. I think also we have to have those conversations with those key department heads we talked about earlier this week, who need to cut their operating expenses a little more. And I'm not gonna, we know who they are. They haven't finished those conversations. That's gonna help close the gap. And then I think to the point of the capital projects, which were brought up by my colleagues, let's take those, let's break those out. Let's have a deeper dive. We need those department heads to show up at the next budget meeting. Let's have them here. And the rest of them, we can just carve aside as saying we're locked in. So capital, OE, personnel, and then at the end, when we get to that point, then we can look at the fund balance. That's it. I would motion to adjourn after that.
We probably should have a closed session along with that extra hearing instead of relying on, because it might be a long enough conversation. So we should have a closed along with the next Saturday budget, and it can't be next Saturday. That's all I'm saying right now.
Okay, you got it.
I haven't seen my boy in a while. He's coming home. So.
Fair enough. Family first. Okay, yeah, I was gonna say the same. I was gonna talk about our process going forward. We're not ready to introduce on the 5th. So, Mr. Koloje, in terms of the statute, is that gonna put us in a bad place or what?
It'll produce a love letter from Trenton that says, hey, you were supposed to send us your budget by your first meeting and we didn't get it. What's going on with you guys? But there's not going to be any real penalty. There wouldn't be any withholding of state aid. The state typically, when they send these letters out, it becomes a hurry up and wait situation anyway, because they automatically need to go through 1/3 of the municipalities' budgets, because we're on a schedule where they examine 1 year and then we get 2 years to self-examine. Because of the pandemic in Chapter 74, anyone who was using average revenues was sending their budget down. So they've been overwhelmed with the number of budgets that they've had to review and approve. So the only thing that's really going to wind up affecting us if we don't meet the deadline as dictated by the local finance notice is that it'll probably take longer to get the state to give us approval to actually adopt the budget, which will require the TC to adopt resolutions to amend the temporary budget so that we stay within the ability to spend money and make payroll and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And
go ahead.
I was just going to say for next year, like in my opinion, we started this whole, I know we had an extension from the state, but we started the whole thing way too late. Like I really like if we can maybe think about implementing this again, that the departments, the committees, the standing committees have a separate meeting of their standing committee to go over the line items from those departments, because that was really helpful when we did that a couple of years ago. And then at least one member of the township committee has that information. So it's usually, it was the chair of that committee with those relevant department heads in that committee. And that was really helpful. And that usually happened like October, November. So we start going over that stuff, because this is I don't want to be doing this again in 5 minutes after we finish it. That's what's going to happen if we keep amending.
Yeah, so that, we're going to schedule the budget workshop. We'll figure that out over email. We'll look at our calendars. But, I have to say, everything's got to be ready for the next budget workshop. Ready. Final calculations. That's it. And everyone knows what we need to look at from this discussion, and hopefully we will not be receiving that information last minute. It's not good for you all as our department leads, as our employees, because that puts a lot of anxiety and stress on you. And it's definitely not good for us either, because, we're spending the people's money here. This is very serious business. There's nothing more important that we do as elected representatives of the people. So let's get it tightened up and packaged for the next budget workshop, and we'll take it from there. And this is going to bring us to the public comment period. Mr. Waltz, do we have any members of the public who are interested in speaking up?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Township Committee. We'll now begin the public comment portion of the meeting for the budget. If any meeting attendee would like to address the Township Committee, please use the raise your hand function. We will convert you to a panelist and allow you 3 minutes to speak. Do you have anybody that would like to address the committee at this time? I see no one, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Waltz. I move that we adjourn and wish everyone a happy weekend.
Second.
Second.